The first thing Karen did after slamming my front door open without knocking was to fling her arms in the air and yell, "You can't have a private meeting here without HOA approval!" The second thing she did was stop mid-rant, her mouth hanging half open like she'd forgotten how to breathe. That's because the man sitting in the leather armchair by my fireplace wasn't just any guest. It was Richard Gaines, the actual head of Homeland Security, in a crisp navy suit, holding a mug of my coffee like he owned the place. I wish I could say her reaction was quiet awe, but it was more like someone hit pause on a feral cat. She blinked twice, looked at me, then back at him, then at me again. "You can't just have strangers in the lodge," she sputtered, voice cracking. Her hands were still frozen in the air like she was leading an invisible orchestra. For context, my mountain lodge sits about 2 miles past the last streetlight in our little gated community, an HOA-run slice of pine-covered heaven with rules about everything from mailbox paint to the visual harmony of seasonal decorations. I bought the property before the HOA existed, but because the only road runs through their jurisdiction, they've always believed they can oversee me like I'm the last unruly child in a neighborhood of perfect lawns. Karen, the HOA president, is the high priestess of that cult. So when she barged in uninvited that morning, she didn't know my meeting had anything to do with Homeland Security. She only knew my driveway had 2 unfamiliar SUVs and a black sedan parked nose to nose like some kind of crime drama sting. Which, in fairness, wasn't entirely wrong. "Karen," I said calmly, standing between her and the fire where Gaines sat, "this is a private property. You can't just walk in." "Wrong," she snapped, instantly regaining her Karen footing. "HOA bylaws give me the right to inspect suspected misuse of property at any time." She even reached into her massive tote bag like she was about to pull out laminated evidence. Gaines didn't move. He just sipped his coffee, watching her like she was a curious new species. Then he glanced at me with a barely raised eyebrow, the kind of silent question that says, "Do you need me to handle this?" "No need," I told him, because I wasn't about to let Karen believe she'd rattled me in front of one of the most powerful officials in the country. "Karen, I'm meeting with a federal guest. If you'd like to continue, you can sign this." I held out a sheet of paper I'd prepared in case she tried something exactly like this, a liability waiver stating she acknowledged the risk of interfering in a federal matter. Her eyes darted over it, and for a split second, I thought she might actually sign. Then she laughed, a short, brittle sound, and tossed it onto my coffee table. "Oh, please. Federal? Do you expect me to believe that?" Gaines finally spoke, his voice quiet but cutting. "Ma'am, interfering with a federal security consultation is a prosecutable offense. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I swear, I've never seen someone's complexion shift through so many colors in such a short time. She went from pink to white to a blotchy mix of both, like she couldn't decide whether to blush or faint. But instead of leaving, she doubled down. "You people think you can intimidate me with titles and big words. I've lived here for 20 years. Nothing happens in this community without my knowledge." Gaines set his mug down, leaned forward slightly, and said, "That's the problem." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I could see her mentally rearranging the chessboard. Karen doesn't lose, not in HOA meetings, not in bake-off disputes, not even in arguments about who's allowed to put a gnome in their front yard. And now she was trying to figure out whether she could win this one, too. "All right," she said finally, her voice low and deliberate. "If this really is federal business, then I'll need proof. Otherwise, I'll be bringing this up at the emergency board meeting tonight." I didn't respond right away, because something told me she was already planning her next move. And I wasn't wrong. As she turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder and said, "Oh, and by the way, your property taxes are overdue." Then she walked out like she just checkmated me. Gaines watched her go, then looked at me. "She's going to be a problem." "She's always a problem," I said. "But I think she's about to become a bigger one." I was right about that, too. That night, Karen didn't just hold an emergency HOA meeting. She somehow convinced half the neighborhood that I was hosting a secret militia training camp at the lodge. I only found out because a friend who still attends those meetings texted me a picture of the evidence Karen presented. Grainy cell phone shots of my driveway from that morning, with little red circles around the SUVs and sedan. She'd even zoomed in enough to make the license plates unreadable, which only made them look more suspicious. By the time the meeting ended, there were rumors flying that Homeland Security was investigating me, that I'd brought dangerous individuals into the community, and that the HOA was considering a petition to have my access road gated off. For the safety of residents. When I read that part, I laughed out loud. Because if they actually tried it, they'd be blocking their own emergency exit, and I was pretty sure Gaines would have something to say about that. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of tires crunching over gravel. When I looked out the window, I saw not one but 3 HOA board members, including Karen, marching up my driveway with clipboards. Behind them was a 4th person I didn't recognize, wearing a blazer and sunglasses, clearly not dressed for mountain weather. When I opened the door, Karen didn't even greet me. "We're here to conduct a formal property inspection," she announced. "Bring a warrant," I said. "This is private HOA business," she shot back. "That's fine," I said, stepping aside. "But you'll have to run it by him first." I pointed toward the living room, where Gaines was once again seated, this time on a laptop. He didn't look up, but he did raise his hand in a casual wave. The stranger in the blazer froze mid-step, then turned toward Karen with a look that could curdle milk. "You didn't tell me we'd be walking into a federal operational site," he said. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't just Karen poking around for petty HOA points anymore. She was pushing into a sphere that could make her problems a lot bigger than unapproved mailbox colors. I decided to let her keep walking right into it. Karen didn't retreat. She adjusted her scarf like she was settling in for a fight, and if there's one thing I've learned about her over the years, it's that embarrassment never slows her down. If anything, it fuels her. She glanced at the man in the blazer, who, I was now noticing, had an earpiece curled behind his right ear, and said in her most imperious voice, "We'll only be a moment. HOA inspections are routine." The man gave her a slow, flat stare. "Routine inspections do not take place during an active federal operation. Ma'am, you need to leave." She laughed. Not a friendly laugh, a brittle, high-pitched sound meant to signal she was unimpressed. "You can't just make up some operation to keep me out. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. That means I have oversight over every property in this community." It was a ridiculous claim on its face, but the problem with Karen is she believes these things when she says them. She lives in a constant state of self-assigned authority, the kind that feeds on other people's hesitation. Gaines closed his laptop with a quiet snap and finally stood up. He's a tall man, not giant cowboy tall, but tall enough to loom without trying. He crossed the room in 3 slow steps, then stopped just close enough that Karen had to tilt her head back to look at him. "Ma'am, let me make this clear. This property is under temporary federal jurisdiction until our work is concluded. That means your HOA authority does not apply here." Karen tried to answer, but it came out as a half-swallowed sound, like she wasn't sure if she was being threatened or invited to challenge him. Her 2 board members' sidekicks shifted uncomfortably, clearly less eager to be part of this showdown. The man in the blazer leaned toward her and said something in a low voice I couldn't catch. Whatever it was, it drained some of the bravado out of her posture. She smoothed her scarf again, muttered something about making a note of this for the record, and then marched back down my driveway. The 2 board members followed, their clipboards hanging limp in their hands. Only the man in the blazer stayed behind, stepping closer to Gaines and speaking in a tone that was just barely low enough to make me strain to hear. When they finished, the man nodded at me politely before leaving. I closed the door and turned to Gaines. "I'm guessing that wasn't the neighborhood's new treasurer." "That," he said, "was someone who's supposed to be in Washington right now. And if he's here, it means someone's been making phone calls they shouldn't." I didn't have to ask who. Karen wasn't the type to keep her grievances local. She'd been on the news once, a short clip about a zoning dispute that she managed to spin into a community safety crusade. She loved attention almost as much as she loved winning. By lunchtime, I had confirmation. My friend from the HOA texted me a screenshot of a community forum post. Karen had gone online to warn residents that she had uncovered a shadow government operation in our neighborhood. The post was a masterpiece of paranoia and self-importance, vague enough to avoid outright slander, but specific enough to make my lodge sound like the headquarters of some covert plot. She claimed she had sources who told her the vehicles parked outside my property were linked to deep federal surveillance, and that our once peaceful mountain enclave was being turned into a staging ground. Her closing line was pure Karen. I have taken the liberty of alerting appropriate contacts at the national level. Rest assured, your safety remains my top priority. I read it twice, then turned my phone so Gaines could see. He read it once, set the phone down, and said, "All right. She's escalated." That was putting it mildly. In less than 24 hours, Karen had gone from barging into my living room to possibly involving federal officials who had nothing to do with our actual business. And Gaines made it very clear, our actual business needed to stay quiet. I asked him if we should be worried, but he shook his head. Not yet. But keep your phone charged. Around sunset I got my first taste of what "not yet" meant. I was out on the back deck, watching the last light catch on the snowcaps, when a pair of SUVs pulled up, not the black federal ones, but glossy, civilian-looking models. 4 men got out. They were all in outdoor gear, but their movements were too in sync, too deliberate to be casual. One of them broke off from the group and came up the steps toward me. He smiled politely, which didn't match the hard focus in his eyes. "Evening. You're the owner?" I said I was. "We're from the HOA Security Committee," he said, as if that was a real law enforcement branch. "We've been asked to keep watch on the property while things are sorted out." It took effort not to laugh in his face. The HOA Security Committee was 3 guys who used to volunteer at the 4th of July barbecue, and now patrolled the neighborhood in golf carts. But these men were not those guys. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. The man's smile didn't move. "Karen says otherwise." I kept my voice calm, because this was the kind of situation where calm either diffuses things or forces the other side to show their hand. "Karen doesn't own this property. And you need to leave before you find out just how wrong she is about her authority." One of the men down by the SUVs spoke into a handheld radio. A moment later, Gaines came around the side of the lodge, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture, just said, "Gentlemen. Off my sight." That was when the politeness evaporated. The man in front of me stepped back, nodded once to his group, and they left without another word. When they were gone, Gaines stood beside me, watching the tail lights disappear down the mountain road. "She's fishing," he said. "Feels more like setting traps," I replied. "Either way," he said, "she's not done." He was right. I didn't have to wait long to see just how far she was willing to take it. The next morning, I woke up to a low hum outside. Looking out my bedroom window, I saw a drone hovering above the lodge, just high enough to be outside pellet gun range. It didn't take a genius to figure out who sent it. And I had a feeling it wasn't the only thing she had in the air. The drone was no hobby-grade toy. You could tell from the way it held steady against the mountain wind, its gimbal-mounted camera swiveling like a one-eyed vulture. It was just far enough away that I couldn't make out the operator, but I didn't need to. Karen's fingerprints were all over this kind of stunt. I stepped out onto the deck, coffee in hand, and stared right at it. The camera rotated to face me, pausing like it wanted me to know I was being watched. I gave it a slow, sarcastic wave before going back inside. Gaines was already at the kitchen table, reviewing something on his laptop. "You have a visitor," I told him. He didn't even glance up. "I know. I've got its signal." "You can track it?" "I can see everything it sees," he said, turning the laptop so I could catch a glimpse. On the screen was a live feed from the drone's camera, the same shaky view of my lodge I'd just been looking at, but now framed by a window full of data, GPS coordinates, battery levels, operator location. I leaned in. "Please tell me you're going to do something fun with this." He smirked. "Already tracing it." Within 2 minutes, he'd pinpointed the operator to a patch of open space near the HOA clubhouse. Karen's favorite place to stage her community safety initiatives. I asked if he wanted to confront her, but he shook his head. "Not yet. Let her think she's in control. The more rope she takes, the more she'll hang herself with it." That rope came faster than either of us expected. By noon, the drone was gone, but the real invasion had started. Cars began slowing as they passed my driveway. Some stopped entirely, their drivers leaning out with phones to snap photos. A white SUV pulled up and idled for so long I finally went out to see what they wanted. The driver was a woman I vaguely recognized from the annual HOA picnic, someone who always hovered near Karen like a backup singer. She put on a polite smile and said, "Just curious about the federal thing going on here. Karen says we're allowed to document anything unusual for our safety logs." I didn't bother with sarcasm. Karen says a lot of things. Then I turned and walked back inside. From the living room window, I watched her snap 3 more pictures before finally driving off. Gaines closed his laptop and joined me at the window. "She's building a case," he said. "A fake one, but enough to stir people up. Any chance she's smart enough to realize she's poking the wrong bear?" I asked. He didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. That night, the next phase of her campaign arrived. It started with a knock at the door just after dark. I opened it to find 2 sheriff's deputies on the porch. They were polite but formal, asking if they could clear up some concerns raised by the HOA. I invited them in, offered coffee, and listened as they explained that Karen had filed a complaint about suspicious gatherings at my property, alleging that I was harboring unknown persons with undisclosed affiliations. They clearly didn't buy it, but procedure meant they had to follow up. Gaines emerged from his office halfway through the conversation. He didn't flash a badge or drop his title. He simply introduced himself, answered their questions in vague but authoritative tones, and thanked them for their diligence. By the time they left, the deputies were apologizing for the inconvenience. Once the door closed, Gaines said, "She's not going to stop with local law enforcement. She'll go higher if she thinks she can get someone to take the bait." He was right again. 2 days later, I woke up to a voicemail from a reporter at a regional news station. They'd heard concerns about a possible government training site in a residential community and wanted my comment before they aired anything. I didn't respond immediately, mostly because I was too busy laughing. Karen's genius here was in knowing how to plant a story without leaving fingerprints. If I confronted her, she'd just deny it, maybe even act insulted that I'd accuse her. Gaines took it less lightly. "We can't let this go public," he said. "If she drags this into the media, it'll complicate everything we're doing here." That everything still wasn't my business to know, but I understood enough to see the stakes. And if I was reading him right, Gaines wasn't just worried about bad press, he was worried about attracting the wrong kind of attention from people outside the HOA. We didn't have to wait long for the real twist. On the 3rd day of drone silence, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver unloaded 2 large crates stamped with handling warnings and left without a signature. They were addressed to me, but I hadn't ordered anything. I was halfway through trying to puzzle it out when Gaines appeared, took one look at the labels, and said, "Those aren't yours. Don't touch them." He made a call I wasn't supposed to overhear, speaking in clipped, careful sentences. Within an hour, a black van with no plates arrived, 2 men in tactical jackets loaded the crates inside, and they were gone. Only after they left did he explain. Someone had arranged for high-grade communications equipment to be shipped here, the kind that could be used to fake a surveillance operation. If those crates had been found on my property, Karen's entire fantasy about me running a secret site would have become a lot harder to disprove. I didn't have to guess who ordered them. That night, I sat on the deck with a drink, watching the stars over the ridge, and thought about just how far Karen had escalated in a week. She'd gone from barging into my living room to planting evidence on my doorstep. That wasn't HOA pettiness anymore, that was deliberate sabotage. And as much as I wanted to write her off as just another power-drunk suburban tyrant, I couldn't ignore what Gaines had said earlier. She'd made calls to people she shouldn't. That meant she had connections, or at least thought she did. I was still thinking about that when my phone buzzed with a text from my friend in the HOA. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Not board only. Whole community invited. Karen says it's about you. I sent a short reply, thanks, and set the phone down. Gaines came out a few minutes later and asked what was on my mind. I told him about the meeting. Good, he said. Good? She's about to put her cards on the table. And when she does, we'll be ready. The way he said it made me think tomorrow night was going to be a lot more than just an HOA meeting. The meeting was set for 7, but when I arrived at the HOA clubhouse at 6:30, the parking lot was already packed. Cars lined both sides of the road, headlights cutting through the cold mountain air. Through the clubhouse's big front windows, I could see a crowd milling around, clutching styrofoam cups of coffee like they were settling in for a show. Karen was in her element. She stood near the podium at the front, flanked by her loyalists, wearing a crimson blazer that practically shouted, "Authority!" Every time someone new walked in, she swept over to greet them, her voice carrying in that way people's voices do when they want to make sure everyone hears them being important. I spotted my friend from the HOA near the back and made my way over. "How bad?" I asked. She grimaced. "She's got a slideshow." That told me everything I needed to know about how far she'd planned this. Karen didn't just improvise drama, she produced it. At exactly 7, she banged a gavel she'd brought from home, because of course she had, and called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her tone dripping with grave concern. "We are here tonight to address an unprecedented threat to our community." She clicked a button on a small remote, and the first slide appeared on the projector screen, a grainy still from the drone feed, showing my lodge from above. "Many of you have noticed unusual activity at the far end of Timberline Road," she continued. "Multiple unmarked vehicles. Unknown individuals coming and going at odd hours. Federal officials claiming jurisdiction over private property without HOA oversight." A murmur ran through the room. Karen let it settle before moving to the next slide, a blurry zoom on one of the black SUVs from that first day, its license plate conveniently obscured. "I have reason to believe," she said, lowering her voice like she was about to reveal a secret, "that a covert operation is being staged here. One that puts all of us at risk." I glanced toward the side entrance, where Gaines had slipped in unnoticed. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed on her like a cat watching a mouse rearrange the cheese. Karen advanced to a slide of the crates that had been delivered to my property. I had no idea how she got those photos. Probably one of her security committee lackeys had been watching from the tree line. "High-grade communications equipment," she announced. "Delivered without the homeowner's request." "Do you know what that means?" "It means someone else is using that lodge for purposes unknown to this board." I raised my hand. She pretended not to see me. Instead, she launched into a bullet-point list of possible risks: surveillance of residents, storage of hazardous materials, paramilitary activity. By the time she got to compromising our property values, I half expected her to claim I was building a missile silo. When she finally stopped to take a breath, I spoke up. "Karen, you've made a lot of accusations without a single piece of verifiable evidence." She turned toward me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain the presence of these federal agents on your property?" All eyes swung to me. I could feel the room leaning in, waiting for me to deny it, stumble, or give them something juicy to chew on. Instead, I said, "Happy to." But I think the agent in question should speak for himself. Gaines stepped forward, and you could actually hear the collective intake of breath as people registered who, and what, he was. His suit wasn't flashy, but it carried that unmistakable air of someone used to walking into secure buildings without being stopped. Richard Gaines, he said simply. Director of Homeland Security. Karen's face froze in a mask of polite disbelief, the kind that says this can't be real, but I can't risk being wrong. I can confirm, Gaines continued, that my presence at the lodge is part of a federal security matter. It does not involve any resident of this community, and it poses no danger to anyone here. Any interference in our work would be unwise. A ripple of whispers swept the room. Someone in the front row asked if that meant the HOA had no jurisdiction over the property. Gaines didn't even look at Karen when he said, "Correct." Karen tried to recover, leaning toward the microphone. With all due respect, Mr. Gaines, our community has the right to know what's happening in its own backyard. No, you don't, Gaines said flatly. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you aware of every creak in the floorboards. Karen's jaw worked like she was chewing on a retort, but nothing came out. I thought that might be the end of it, but Gaines wasn't done. He stepped closer to the podium. Furthermore, I have reason to believe someone here has been intentionally obstructing a federal operation. That person has contacted individuals outside their legal authority, disseminated false information to local law enforcement and the media, and attempted to introduce unauthorized materials onto a protected site. It was surgical, the way he said it. No names, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. Karen's crimson blazer suddenly looked like it was weighing her down. One of the board members cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion until we have more information. That was the HOA version of waving a white flag. Karen adjourned the meeting with a clipped gavel bang, avoiding eye contact with everyone as she gathered her papers. I stayed near the back, watching her pack up her projector. She didn't look rattled, exactly, more like someone already plotting their next move. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. Gaines followed a few steps behind. You just made her dangerous, I said. We reached my truck, and he paused before getting in. Keep your doors locked tonight. If she thinks she's lost, she'll try something reckless. I did lock my doors. I also checked the windows twice before going to bed. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. I looked out to see headlights cutting across my driveway, slow, deliberate, like the driver was trying not to wake me. The vehicle stopped just short of the lodge, and a shadowy figure got out, carrying something bulky. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, the figure was gone. In its place, sitting neatly at the base of the steps, was a box wrapped in brown paper. No markings. No address. I didn't touch it. Gaines appeared a minute later, already dressed, as if he'd been awake. He took one look at the box, muttered something under his breath, and pulled out his phone. Less than 15 minutes later, the black van was back. 2 men loaded the box inside without opening it. What was in it? I asked. Gaines didn't answer until they were gone. Let's just say if you'd opened it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And for the first time since Karen had started this whole mess, I realized she might not just be playing an HOA power game anymore. She was in over her head, and she didn't even know it. By morning, word had already spread about the incident at my lodge, even though no one outside the federal circle knew exactly what had happened. That was Karen's talent. She didn't need facts to set a rumor loose. She just hinted, and the community filled in the blanks with whatever version best matched their fears. When I went into town for supplies, I could feel the stares. At the coffee shop, 2 women at the counter stopped talking when I walked in. One of them leaned toward the other and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. That's him. I didn't bother correcting them. Let them have their theories. Back at the lodge, Gaines was on the phone, pacing with the kind of controlled tension you only see in people who deal with crises for a living. When he hung up, he told me Karen had been making more calls, not to reporters this time, but to a contact in a state agency. "She's fishing for someone high enough to scare us off," he said. "And she doesn't care what mess she drags herself into along the way." That mess arrived sooner than either of us expected. Around 4 that afternoon, a convoy of 3 black SUVs rolled up my drive. These weren't the same ones I'd seen before, different plates, different drivers, same air of official business. The lead vehicle stopped, and a man in a heavy coat stepped out, flashing credentials I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Special Agent Crowell, some division I'd never heard of. He wasn't here for me, exactly. He was here because concerns had been raised about the handling of certain materials, meaning the mysterious crate from the night before. I could see where this was going. Karen hadn't just tipped someone off, she'd sent them directly into our laps. Crowell asked pointed questions, trying to trip me into admitting I knew more than I did. Gaines fielded most of them with that calm, clipped tone that says both, "I'm cooperating," and, "You're wasting my time." Eventually, Crowell seemed to accept that there was nothing to see, but he left with a warning. "If there's anything you haven't disclosed, now's the time." The moment they were gone, Gaines looked at me and said, "She's officially crossed into federal obstruction territory." I didn't get to ask what that meant for her before my phone buzzed with another text from my HOA friend. "Karen's calling an emergency board-only session tonight. Not at Clubhouse. At her house." That was unusual enough to set off alarms in my head. Karen never moved meetings to private residences unless she wanted control over the guest list and the conversation. Gaines didn't hesitate. "We're going." "Pretty sure we're not invited," I said. "That's the point." 2 hours later, we were parked a block from Karen's sprawling 2-story home, the kind of place that looked like it had been staged for a real estate brochure. Through the living room windows, we could see a cluster of board members seated around her dining table, papers spread out like they were drafting a constitution. We stayed far enough away to avoid being obvious, but close enough to read lips through binoculars. Karen was animated, gesturing with sharp jabs of her hand. The others looked uneasy, except for one man, tall, clean-cut, mid-40s, who was nodding along with every word she said. "That's not one of the board," I murmured. "No," Gaines said. "And he's not HOA." We watched for another 10 minutes, catching fragments of phrases like, "take control," and "make it permanent." I didn't like the sound of either. Then, without warning, the tall man got up and walked toward the front door. "Time to move," Gaines said. We slipped away before he could spot us, but the whole drive back to the lodge, I kept replaying the image of Karen leaning in toward him, whispering like they were co-conspirators. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't just about embarrassing me anymore. It was about leverage. The next morning confirmed it. When I stepped outside to bring in firewood, there was a folded note tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. No envelope, just plain paper with blocky handwriting. "This is bigger than you. Walk away." No signature. I showed it to Gaines. He read it once, then burned it in the fireplace without a word. "You're not taking that seriously enough," I said. "I'm taking it exactly seriously enough," he replied. "She's making threats she doesn't understand. But someone she's talking to does." That someone made themselves known that evening. We were sitting in the living room, the fire crackling, when every light in the house went out. Total blackout. Outside, I could hear the distant thrum of a generator somewhere down the ridge, meaning it wasn't a grid failure. Someone had cut the power here, and only here. Gaines grabbed a flashlight, motioned for me to stay put, and disappeared into the dark. A few minutes later he was back, holding a severed extension cord in one hand. "Deliberate," he said. Before I could respond, a knock echoed through the lodge. "Slow. Deliberate," Gaines opened the door to find no one there, just a cardboard box on the porch. This time, the box was open, and inside was a single black binder with no markings. He flipped it open. Inside were printed photos, grainy shots of me at the grocery store, at the gas station, even at my mailbox. The last page was a zoomed-in picture of me talking to Gaines on the deck. It wasn't HOA surveillance anymore. This was professional. We sat in silence for a long minute before Gaines spoke. "She's given someone outside the HOA a reason to care about you. That's your new problem." The next day, Gaines made calls I didn't hear. When he was done, he told me to pack an overnight bag. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere she can't follow." We left just before dusk, taking the back road out of the mountains. Halfway down, I glanced in the side mirror and saw headlights in the distance, staying far enough back to avoid suspicion. We didn't stop until we reached a small, nondescript motel 2 towns over. Gaines paid cash for the room and didn't register our names. I barely slept, kept awake by the feeling that the walls were closing in, not from the lodge, but from whatever net Karen had thrown around us. In the morning, Gaines was already dressed, coffee in hand. "This ends today," he said. Back at the lodge, 2 black vans were parked in the driveway. Inside, a small team was methodically packing up equipment, scanning the property with devices I didn't recognize. One of them handed Gaines a folder. He read it, nodded, and turned to me. "It's done. Your part in this is over. What about her?" He paused. "She's not your problem anymore." I never found out exactly what happened to Karen. She stopped showing up at HOA meetings. Her house went on the market a month later. The official word was that she'd relocated for personal reasons. But sometimes, when I drive past the now empty lot where her moving truck had been, I wonder if she ever realized just how far out of her depth she'd gone, or if she still believes she was the hero of her own story, right up until the day it swallowed her whole.